How's it going, everybody?
You know who it is.
My name is Sunwoo, and in today's video I want to talk a little bit about the Faderfox EC4 and how it compares to something like the Novation Launchcontrol XL, because I think these are two controllers many people are considering when they want to control their gear with some MIDI knobs. This is not going to be an in-depth tutorial or review of either of them. If you want to know all the functions of the EC4, Loopop already made a great video of this. This is more meant to be an off-the-cuff pros and cons video for people who are considering buying either one of these. Let's start with the EC4. You have 16 knobs here that you can turn to change a value, but you can also press them to change something else happening. And these presses can be momentary, or you can also toggle things on and off. Right now these are all set up to be momentary and switch to a certain value and then drop down to another value. You can see that it has a display that is showing me all 16 values or all 16 parameters here at once. And when I turn the knobs, a parameter value will go up and down. It doesn't always have to go between 0 and 127. You can go into the edit menu and choose a different way to display these parameters. So for example, from -50 to +50. So if we go out of the edit menu now, this goes from -50 to +50. So there are different ways of displaying these parameter changes. Right now it's showing the name of the parameter that I'm editing as default, but if I press up here and press bar, now it shows me all the values of each of the knobs in a little segmented bar display. And if you press number, you see the value immediately without being shown what parameter it is. And this is where I want to talk about the display in terms of pros and cons. Because yes, it is pretty cool that you can see all the parameters on screen and know which knob will do what. However, I don't know if that's maybe just my simple brain, but when having 16 different parameters on screen, I still find it somewhat difficult to locate the right knob that belongs to the parameter on screen, if that makes sense. So it does look pretty cluttered on screen, and then finding the knob that corresponds to whichever parameter on screen is a little bit difficult when you have many different parameters mapped. So this is something I probably wouldn't do too often, especially if I have set up multiple pages of parameters, because what you see right now are 16 parameters. But what we can do is we can set up different groups, which are pages of parameters. So right now I am in this group up here, the bass drum. I'm changing the parameters of bass drum, but if I press group and this one here, I'm in the snare drum group. So now I'm controlling a different channel and different parameters on a different channel. And you can have 16 groups, so that means 16 times 16 parameter layouts. But that's not all. Not only can you have 16 groups, but these 16 groups are saved in what's called a setup, and you can have up to 16 setups. So 16 times 16 times 16 is what you can have in here. And if you really need this many setups and this many MIDI parameters mapped at any given time, then this is the device for you, because I don't think there are a lot of devices that have more setups savable at one time. If you compare this to the Launchcontrol XL, for example, here you can have a total of 16 different layouts for this. So 16 modes here, 16 times 16 different groups here. And one thing I want to point out here is the difference in selecting these groups or these modes. On the EC4, I press the group button, and now I click any of these 16 encoders, and it immediately enters this group and takes me out of the selection menu. Here I press mode, and I can select a different mode or a different layout, but it stays in this mode selection menu. So I can keep selecting different layouts. So if in a live situation you quickly had to switch between different modes on the go, this option would definitely be more comfortable than this one, where you would always have to go back into the group menu, select one, and then you have to go back into the group menu and select a different layout. So here you can do it much quicker if that's something you need. This is probably not the case for many people, but I thought it was worth pointing it out. And here, if I want to go out of this mode select menu, I would have to press mode again. And now these buttons down here actually have different functions of, for example, muting a certain channel or triggering a certain CC message. Which leads me to the next topic, the hardware controls in general. As I said, here you've got 16 encoders, which not only turn, but also can have a separate click function, which is really nice. Here we have 24 knobs, but these can only be turned. They don't have a click functionality. However, you've got 8 more than you have here, which is also really nice. In terms of feeling, these feel a little bit lighter to turn. Now this is still pretty new and unused, so I don't know if it will change, but these are definitely harder to turn than these. They are also a bit smaller than these. If you had very big hands, I think this would be easier to control, but these are not a problem at all. So we've got 8 knobs more here than we have here, but no click function. Obviously, we have the 8 faders here, and then we have the 16 buttons down here that can also send MIDI CC messages or notes or anything like that. Another thing the Launchcontrol XL has over the EC4 is the DAW controls. So it has transport controls, record and play, as well as solo, arm and mute select for tracks. So it will integrate with Ableton Live, for example, or other DAWs better than the EC4. Although the EC4 also has Ableton Live setup, in which it will automatically control the currently selected device. So all these controls will be automatically mapped to whichever device is the first one on your current track. And when it comes to editing these controllers, the EC4 definitely has one big advantage, and that is that everything can be edited on the device itself. So you can assign all the parameters, you can do all the naming and everything in detail on the device itself. You press the function button, go into the setup, you press the function button, press edit. And as you can see, you can assign the MIDI CCs, you can assign the channel, you can set upper and lower limits for the parameters, and you can even change the acceleration mode of the knobs. So you really can fine-tune the controller in detail without using a computer. Is this the most comfortable way of editing it? No, but you can also edit this with a companion software. So if you want to do it on the computer and want to make it a little bit easier for yourself, you can do that. However, I think if you get used to this, this could become very quick to doing it on the device itself. And having the option is always nicer than not having the option at all. So yeah, this can be completely edited on the device itself, no computer necessary, whereas the Launchcontrol XL relies on Novation's component software, which is good in its own right. It works well, there's no problem or no complaint from my side, but you need to use the computer. And finally, let's take a look at the connectivity. On the Faderfox, we have USB-B port, which powers the device. And we have a TRS MIDI in and a TRS MIDI out. On the Launchcontrol XL, however, we have a USB-C port which powers the device, and we have full-size MIDI DIN in, out, and through ports. For me personally, I prefer the ports of the Launchcontrol XL because most devices these days have USB-C, so I can directly go from this USB-C to another USB-C and control that device, and then having all these full-size MIDI ports also makes it very useful in the studio without needing extra adapters. Whereas the EC4 has its USB-B, and I'm not really a fan of it because usually when you have a cable, it's USB-B on this side and then the other side is USB-A. And since many devices these days are even phasing out USB-A, that means I would need another connector or adapter if I want to go into a USB-C port, so I would need one adapter there. And then if I want to connect this to any kind of MIDI gear that has 5-pin, I would need 2 more adapters here. And this comes with the adapters, but it's easy to lose them, and also I'm not a big fan of having to use adapters all the time. However, if you have smaller gear that has MIDI TRS, then this is really nice and can make for a small setup. So it really depends on what you already have with your gear, whether or not MIDI TRS or MIDI 5-pin DIN is better for you. And lastly, obviously the size difference is quite significant between these two devices. I think they crammed a lot of functionality into a pretty compact device here without making it feel cramped or anything. This also doesn't feel cramped. The space between the knobs, for example, is pretty much the same as it is here. Maybe even a tiny bit smaller, I don't know. But yeah, this feels good, but this is quite a lot larger. However, I don't think it's ridiculously large for what it does. And with the EC4, I like how small it is. One criticism in terms of the design or the layout for me would be that it has this stand here, which in itself, it's nice that it's angled toward you. However, I would like it if this was just like a flip out stand or something like that, because this way, when you transport it, you always got this awkward thing here, and otherwise it would be quite flat. So this is something I would change in terms of the design if possible. Of course, then the USB port would also have to be moved a little higher. Maybe that's why it is there. Either way, that's just a small complaint design-wise. Whereas the launch control also has a slight angle, but it doesn't have a weird lip there at the bottom. And that's it for this quick comparison video. In the end, it really depends on your setup, whether or not the EC4 or the Launchcontrol XL is better for you. There are pros and cons to either of these devices, but I think they are both good in their own right. But please let me know down in the comments, do you have either of these devices? Are there any things that I have missed? And what do you like and dislike about them? And also, don't forget to leave a like, ring the bell, subscribe, and see you in the next one. Peace.